Hello viewers, welcome back to another episode of How to Beat Beth Harmon. If you've been following our series so far, I've played against the first four Beth Harmon bots here on chess.com. Next one up would be bot number 5, and that one is rated 2400. That is well above me. I'm going to need to be in tip-top shape to stand any chance against this opponent. So let's go train. One of my favorite websites to train on is Chess Tempo. So they give you what's called tactics problems. They are exercises where you have to calculate a forced win. So I'll go play through a bunch of them, and hopefully you guys will learn something along the way. So let's go to training chess tactics. You can create an account. If you do that, you get a rating based on how you do, and it'll give you problems that are close to your skill level. I have an account, but I'm just doing this not logged in, just for demonstration purposes. So here's our first puzzle. Let me take a look at what's going on here. So I noticed the black king is not in very good shape. You should put the king somewhere like in the corner here where he has more defenders around him. So the king's kind of exposed, and I'm looking for ways to take advantage of that. I've already got control of a number of squares here, so if I do this, I sacrifice my queen, but it's okay. Now black is in checkmate. The rook puts the king in check, and the king can't run to any of these squares. My pieces control them, and that protects the rook. So that's a pretty easy one. Let's move on and try another. Alright, again, the black king is kind of exposed. I'm looking for a way to try to take advantage of that. If I bring my bishop over here, that puts him in check. Now, to be clear, you don't get any points just for putting your opponent in check. A lot of beginners seem to get excited by putting their opponent in check and even make a bad move just so they can say check. That's not a great idea. Checks have to have a purpose. So I'm not thinking about this just so I can say check. I gotta think about what's my follow-up and what makes that check worthwhile. So if I play bishop check, king has to move up over here. Then I can take the bishop, and that's going to be checkmate. So let's do it. So king has no squares to run to, pawn's protected by the rook, queen protects the bishop. Another easy one. Let's try another. Alright, one thing I like to do is I like to take stock at the beginning, see what the situation is. It looks like I'm down 2 pawns. That's not very good. So white has an extra pawn over here, 3 against 2, and also another pawn over here, 2 against 1. If you're down 2 pawns for nothing, that's usually game over in chess. But black does have some things going for him. Again, the king over here, kind of exposed. Can I take advantage of that somehow? So let's calculate. I can play rook check, and then I'll force king over here, and then I can play rook check over here. Then I'll force the king up, and then another rook check will force the king over here, and then I can just take his rook for free. So let's go for it. So first put the king in check again, and now the king is the only thing protecting that rook. So I'm trying to get the king away from that rook so I can take the rook. So we go here, and now the rook falls. So it's not checkmate, he still has squares, but up a rook, that's easily enough to win. Alright, what's going on here? I am ahead a pawn. I have this extra, wait, sorry. I am down a pawn for a rook. He has an extra rook. That's not good. The king is in the corner which is a bit safer than the squares we've seen in the other problems before. However, I have a lot of attacking pieces over here, so that means I have some potential. Let's see. One thing I could do is I could play a knight over here, just giving up my queen. The reason why I could do that is that if he takes my queen, I could take his pawn here, and that would be checkmate. Is there anything that white can do to defend against that? Not really. So I'm going to sacrifice my queen. And that's checkmate. So I talked about the point count system earlier in a previous video. Queen is worth 9, pawn is worth 1, bishops and knights are worth 3, and rook is worth 5. That gives you a guideline for trying to evaluate trades. Now, some beginners, once they learn that point system, they get too hooked on it and they stop looking for sacrifices. So while it's a guideline, and yeah, you don't want to give up your queen for a pawn usually. If giving up your queen for a pawn puts him in checkmate, though, that's very much worth doing. So don't be enslaved to the point count. Keep an eye open for sacrifices because there are things other than material that matter in chess. Let's see. We are down a pawn. So black has an extra pawn over here. His king, though, is lacking some squares to run to. My bishop controls this square. I'd love to just play rook down here, but then he just takes with his knight. So that's no good. What could I do instead? Oh, here's a nice idea. So I can't take the knight right away because if I take his knight, he'll take my rook, and rooks are worth more than knights, so that's a bad trade. So what I'll do instead is play a bishop over here. What is that going to do? It's going to block the rook from defending the knight. That's going to force the knight to move, and once the knight moves, I can play the rook down there and put him in checkmate. Black, of course, will not allow me an easy checkmate, so black is going to sacrifice his rook for the bishop, and now I'm winning. I am missing my queen. That is not a good sign, folks, but I do have 2 rooks, so rooks are worth 5 points each, so 10 points for these guys. Queen is worth 9. Also has an extra pawn, so in point count terms, this works out as even. Oh, I saw something. I'm thinking rook takes bishop, and then pawn takes, and then I'll play rook takes, attacking the queen. The big problem white has, though, is that once his queen moves, like say queen over here or something, I can play the rook down here, and that's checkmate. The bishop would cover this square over here, so the white king can't escape. So that just wins. So play the sacrifice. Again, don't ignore sacrifices. Do not be enslaved to point count. And now we go here. In order to avoid a checkmate, if you play like queen over here saying that'd be checkmate, white has to sacrifice his queen. Now I'll be up a bishop, and that's going to be an easy win. Next puzzle. White just sacrificed a rook for a knight, but be a little bit careful here. So if I were to just take that rook, then white just playing a knight check, hitting my king and my rook. We talked about that kind of idea earlier. That's called a fork. White would attack 2 pieces at the same time, and I can't save both of them. So pawn takes, knight checks, king moves, then knight takes rook, pawn takes rook. I don't like that position because white's 2 pawns here are connected. That means that this pawn protects this one. Or I should say more precisely, they're connected if they're next to each other. So they're neighboring files here. They call the columns files. So because they're protecting the d5 pawn, that's going to be not so easy for me to pick off, but my pawn over here, my pawn over there, are going to be vulnerable after that trade. So pawn takes, knight checks, then knight takes rook and pawn takes rook. That pawn, this pawn, could be picked up because they're not protected. So I don't like that position very much. Now I can do something to avoid that. So before taking the rook, I can toss in an intermezzo. I'll first put him in check, and now I'll take the rook. Because once I do that, he can't fork me anymore. My rook's not on e3 anymore, so knight check is just going to hit thin air over there. So now I'm winning. Alright, what's going on here? I have a pawn that's very close to promoting. That's something to be excited about. The bishop, though, is guarding that square, so I can't just push there right away. So let's see. I can play pawn check, and then if king takes it, I can bring my rook back over here. That put him in check, and also hit this bishop. Remember, I'm trying to eliminate that bishop because that bishop is the only thing stopping me from pushing the pawn to promotion. So pawn check, king takes, rook check, hit the king, hit the bishop. I can play rook back. That would get out of check and also protect the bishop, but in that case I'll sacrifice my rook for it. So rook takes, and then pawn promotes. So just to recap, pawn check, king takes, rook check, rook back, rook takes bishop, rook takes rook, promotes and wins. Now white doesn't have to take it. So check, you could just play king h4 over here. In that case, though, I'll play my bishop back here, and that's going to either compel him to take it or play the rook over there, but playing the rook over there is going to cost him a rook for a bishop. That's a good trade for me, bad trade for him. So that's what he's going for. So let's continue that plan. And now I play the rook check that I talked about earlier. And now we just zap the bishop. So we just want a bishop, and this pawn is about to promote, so game is pretty much over. Alright, let's do another one. So he just took something, but the king's in the same file, the same column as my rook, so that means there is some potential here. I want to play bishop takes f4. It's a double check because he'd be in check from both my rook and from my bishop at the same time. So it's like two checks at once. And, oh, I see something very exciting. So we take this, and then the king goes back, and then we take that one. Wait, did I make a mistake? No. Okay, what I almost did was I almost played rook takes, and then king takes, and then queen checks over here. That'd be a mistake because I could just block it with queen h4 and I have nothing. So let's not do that. Let's play this instead. So the only way to avoid checkmate is to take the bishop, but now I can take the rook and that's checkmate. Alright, let's do another one. I'm up a rook. That's great, but that rook is under heavy fire, and black is actually threatening to checkmate me in one move by playing queen takes rook. Queen takes g2. So if I can just save that rook somehow, I'm going to win. Let's see, how can I do that? Or I could just ignore the attack and go on a counteroffensive. So a common mistake among amateur players is that when they see a threat, they just focus on trying to defend against the threat. Stronger players know that you can try to trump that threat by making a stronger threat. So I'm thinking about queen checks over here. King has to move somewhere. My rook takes away those squares, so king has to move here, or the king can move there. The king comes over there, I just play a queen here, and that's checkmate. So you could try kick over here instead, but then again, queen over here is checkmate because the rook is taking away all these squares. So don't get paralyzed by that threat over here. Do something even more powerful. And there's checkmate. All right, let's try one more. Let's see, I'm ahead by a knight. That's good news. What's not so good news is that my queen appears to be trapped. My queen can't go here because of the rook, and I can't take these guys either because they're protected. So let's see, what can I do? Oh, let's play knight check over here. So again, don't be so paralyzed by a threat to your queen that you overlook threats that you could make. So his king over here is kind of vulnerable, so I was looking for ways to try to exploit that. And the move that jumped into my head was I'll play knight check over here. So that's going to sacrifice the knight, but as a purpose, and that purpose is opening up the file here for the rook. So after he takes the knight with, say, this pawn over here, then the rook comes in with check. The rook is protected by the bishop, so king has to move up, and then queen takes pawn is checkmate. My cat is baking for dinner, so this is a good time to wrap up. Some other ways to train. I have a lot of chess books. Here are some ones that helped me out a lot early on when I was getting started. So one of the first books I found was from the Winning Chess series by Yasser Seirawan. I'll go put a link down there in the description. So very beginner friendly, explains things very well. He's a good writer too, and he does a lot of commentary as well, trying to explain Grandmaster games to the masses. So that's probably the best one to get started on, I recommend. Another series of books that helped me out a lot was books by Jeremy Silman. I really liked his book, The Amateur's Mind. So he has his students think out loud while they solve exercises, and he picks apart what they're doing well and what they're doing poorly. So that gives you ideas on how to improve your chess. So that wraps up our episode on training. So I guess I can't procrastinate any longer. In next episode, I will to take on the Beth Harmon bot that is 2400 rated. So be sure to tune in for the next episode, in which I very likely will get massacred with probably 92%, according to what I said in the previous episode. So take care and play better chess.